Welcome everyone to the latest episode of the Success Trampolines podcast. I am your host and chief bouncer, Joe Murphy. Bouncer, not in the doors, I'll throw you out, but very much the bouncer of successes and failures and bouncing back. I today am joined by Dan Light. Hi Dan.
Hi Joe, how you doing?
Very well, pal, very well. Bouncing into Christmas and into 2026 with renewed optimism.
We are indeed, yes.
Absolutely, pal. So, we don't waste time here, Dan, in terms of jumping into the conversation. So we'll kick off, if it's all right with yourself,
Yeah.
with presenting the floor to yourself and you giving us an overview of your career from early start-offs up to present day. And what we'll do, we'll go in on certain parts that have been shared at that point. All right.
Cool, thanks. Yeah, so I'm a little bit, well over 40, would you believe? I'm at the place now where I don't think that many people actually have a career. They have a series of jobs. There's very few people I meet that are kind of career in terms of like doctor and, a profession, a vocation. And I think most of us kind of end up muddling through life and finding ourselves in situations and then pivoting from there. So when I left school, wasn't a good boy and was a bit of a naughty boy and kind of bounced around a bit and no real direction, and left school with one GCSE, which I'm having to have that conversation with my 16-year-old now when I'm telling him to get the homework done.
Interesting, yeah.
Yeah. So what happened next after school was kind of like, who knows, right? So I didn't live in an environment where any form of education or aspirations were fairly low, I would kind of say, on reflection now. So my first job, actually, if I'm being really honest about it, my first job, and this probably won't go down too well, but it was relieving people of their lawnmower engines, if we can say that. And yeah, so at school, I actually had 3 or 4 quite well-paying jobs.
I can imagine.
Left school, no formal education, and my first job, I got a job in a factory making kettles. Now, these aren't any kettles; these are fancy kettles, by the way, because some of these kettles found themselves into Harrods. And that was for the Philips firm. They made kettles locally to me, and so it was basically the first time I'd been paid, and it was like living at home at 17, cash on the hip, thinking, wow, this is really easy. You kind of put a few screws in something and then that's it.
And in the process, you
Sorry?
And in the process, you were blowing off steam by making those kettles. Yeah, I've had to get
Exactly,
some
yeah,
skills in
yeah.
in there.
Yeah, but once you've got a bit of cash, isn't it? When you're young, it's kind of like the world's your oyster, isn't it?
Quite
And
right.
I remember blowing the whole lot on Ben Sherman's and all sorts of things in my first outing.
Oh, the old Fred Perry, the old Fred Perry there.
Yeah, oh yeah, got a Fred Perry, yeah, Fred Perry, Ben Sherman. It was the 90s, slap of Versace, and
That's the one.
so times were good. And I'll never forget, out of all the roles I've had, you meet people along the way, and I met 3 or 4 people there that have ingrained with me. They were hilarious people, really hilarious people, just trying to scratch around, just trying to earn a living, to be honest. Do you know what I mean? Looking back now. But some of the things they've said, some of the wisdom they passed on, I can't say the words they used, but some of it goes, well, actually, from a life lesson perspective, that was quite profound. So from there, that factory actually closed down, actually, and from there, I literally fell into working in a sports shop, and found myself by a miracle as the assistant manager of a retail shop, and I had no idea how, why, or whatever, how that came about. But that was my first inkling of, I suppose, leading teams, trying to get people to do things they don't really want to be doing in as nice a way as possible. And also my first experience of meeting people with huge egos that like treating people like dirt, that are below them. And I hadn't really experienced that at the factory. And in that sports shop, these 2 people just there was the regional manager and there was the manager of the store. And the regional manager was, it was a little bit like, if you remember Hello Hello, there was a guy there that, yeah, he used to turn up, and it was like, no, he used to get the phone call ahead, and he'd come in with his clipboard, and he'd check this and he'd check that, and he actually had a white glove where he'd do the test. Um,
Claim time to claim, very much so. Yeah.
yeah, so, and I thought, you know what? And I just couldn't play by the rules with him, so I found myself demoted very quickly as assistant manager into just working in the store. From there, I worked for an insurance firm, a local insurance that was kind of on the up, and I thought to myself, do you know what? I'm gonna save some money. I'm gonna save up, and I'm gonna just go traveling. My dream was to always go to Australia. It was my number one place growing up. I think I was a kid of the neighbours generation and just had this dream of
Oh,
going to that. Well, less so, but definitely definitely neighbours. And you meet. I don't know about you, Joe. If you've never met, like as as your career goes through, you do meet pivotal people. You may not even know it at the time that they're pivotal people. But I was just on the phone, just taking insurance calls. Deeply, for me, it was deeply dull. I was just kind of just saving up enough money, maybe all through the summer, to get enough to kind of get a ticket. Back then, it was probably fairly cheap compared to what it is now. But so that was the goal, if you can call that a goal. And out of nowhere, the training manager came to me and said, I've listened to you. I remember you from the kind of the induction. Would you like to help some people? By hook or by, I ended up becoming like one of the top sellers in the business. And they kept saying, well, how are you doing this? I was like, I don't really know. I'm just talking to people. I'm just thinking, just seem to be.
can't teach it. Can't teach
Yeah.
it.
Well, it was a little bit like that. I had no clue. I was like, so I kept on getting in trouble on one hand. So I wasn't following some of the procedures they were, but on the other hand, I was selling like, so I think they had a decision to make. Anyway, this training, the head of training came to me and she said, would you like to come into the training department? So I said, and at that point, Joe, God's honest truth, I had no idea that there was a thing called training, that people actually trained other people to do things. I was like, well, what do you mean? Well, the money's a bit better and I haven't got to work shifts or weekends. Okay, I'm in. So that was it for me. I was like, brilliant. Heading over to the training and development team. Now, she was next director of BT and she put her arm around me and was fantastic. She put me through my CPD. She fought hard to get that because that was a bit of a thing for them. They wasn't going to spend any money. And I found myself falling in love with learning, the process of learning, how people learn and that. I was fascinated by it. Really genuinely interesting. I would spend time in my off time learning, reading. So it was definitely, I got the bug basically. Good team there, nice bunch of people. And that then very fast tracked me to quite a lot of responsibility as that business grew, and I was almost like a number two in some regards. And then from there, I took a big punt and I joined Virgin Mobile. So I was one of the very early employees of Virgin Mobile, which meant leaving home and moving across the country on my Todd. So this would have been two. So I was about 23. So I fitted a lot in by 23, 20, yeah, about 23, 2001, 2002. I'll never forget, it was the night I was online, the dial up internet. I had a long wire going down to the stairs to the phone thing downstairs. And I thought, oh, you can get jobs online. I remember going through and it just sounds so archaic now. And Virgin logo thing popped up and I clicked on it. I think I was with Virgin Broadband or something. No, it was in broadband, man, was it? It was like, there was a job going at Virgin Mobile, this new firm, and I thought, oh, well, I said, well, just in for a penny, in for a pound, I'll apply for it. And I got an interview. And I'll never forget, it said the interview was in Trowbridge. And I thought, I have no idea where that is, Trowbridge. For some reason, I thought it was near, like, in West Sussex, in the other side of West. Well, it's
Certain
near Bristol.
places just sound part of the. Yeah, it's a weird
Yeah,
phenomenon, isn't it? Yeah.
yeah. So it's near Bristol. So for the interview, it was a good lick. It was like 2.5, 3 hour drive to the interview. And then I got offered the role and found myself within 2 weeks living out of a hotel just outside of Bath with this new role. Didn't know a living soul, but very exciting times. It was as corporate environments go, it's probably the most innovative, exciting, throwing money at everything. It was the essence of Virgin. Richard Branson would often be in the building. You could kind of talk to him, getting a coffee. It was like just the epitome of what you imagine Virgin would be.
Was there, wasn't it? You know, well, probably still is, but I'm thinking if it's turn of millennium, that was kind of their bag where they went into industries where things had started getting lazy. They wanted to reinvent the industry, wasn't it? You know, they did it in music, did it in planes. You know, I remember some of the commercials they put out on Virgin Atlantic in not necessarily very recent years, but I think they showed how stewardesses, the air cabin crew were wearing grey uniforms, and then here comes in Virgin wearing red. It shows you that they come into the space and reinvent the wheel. So you can see, as you say, with the innovation, new thinking, it plays in very well into how it was an exciting time, both yeah at the turn of the millennium, but also just the time of what they were trying to innovate. So wow, you were part of that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
100%. Yeah, they were the first. They were the first contract-free mobile company, and at the time they got big stars in like Busta Rhymes and Christina Aguilera.
Yeah.
As part and some of all the advertising was constantly getting banned because it was so risky and that sort of. It was just a fantastic time, and the parties were legendary. They made the front page of the Wiltshire Gazette. um, I remember at one point I've got a photo of this is a photo I hold dealer of bottles of tequila with Richard Branson on one side and Keith Chegwin on the other. That kind
Must
of
have been
sums up.
Home Office or somewhere still.
It's in a box. It's in a shoebox in the loft. But it's yeah, that kind of sums that time up. Um, so learned a lot there. The culture was unbelievable, and learned a lot about kind of had to be quite resilient. You know, made friends, all the kind of human side of that. Then they got bought out, and there was redundancies. So time to move kind of back way to East Sussex where I kind of live, I suppose. So I kind of worked out of London, and in a complete culture shift, I ended up working leading from an L&D perspective, looking after the whole of Oxford Street for Topman and Topshop, which at that point, I think, if I'm right, was not if not the maybe one of the biggest stores in Europe. It was an area on its own. It was so huge. And then obviously Topman were the number one retail outlet. The thing that always sticks with me is the culture and having access, and I say access, but close proximity with Richard Branson, being able to talk to him and his leadership team and that kind of stuff. Maybe I've been there, maybe like 2 weeks, and Philip Green came into the office and picked up a stapler and threw it at someone.
You know,
I remember thinking, this is different. This is not what I've been used to for the last 5 years. Yeah, and they were it was a dirty place to work. They treated people like absolute dirt. And I remember once asking to leave 15 minutes to get a. I had maybe like a 2.5, 3 hour commute there and back like every day. And on a Friday, I just said, "Look, do you mind if I kind of just get that one train earlier? It means I just kind of just get back." And it was an absolute no. You'll do the same as everybody else. It doesn't matter. So I said, "Okay, well, look, I've worked extra. Had a conversation about working overtime and that." I said, "Look, if you're not willing to change it, then I think I'll just hand my notice in then." And they said, "Okay, fine." Well, so on that moment, I typed it up and I put it on my desk. I don't think she was a bit. What's that? I said, "That's exactly what I said," and I walked out. And I thought, I'm not. I was there maybe like 6, 7 months, and I thought, I'm not doing this anymore. No plan. And I went and sat near Buckingham Palace and had a sandwich. And Stephen Gerrard was getting his OBE or something that day, and it was so I'm a Liverpool supporter, so that was a bit of a touch. He kind of came past in the car, sort of thing. Yeah, yeah. And I just bought my first property actually, an investment property at that point. And then just as that happened, the credit crunch hit. And from that viewpoint, obviously redundancies were kind of prevalent, and trying to get a role was really difficult. So what I did was with my savings, I bought a ticket to Australia. The thing that I'd wanted to do before. Yeah. And that came at a cost because I lost my home, and had to make a decision on what to do. And I thought, do you know what I'll do? I'll just go to Australia, and what will be will be. So my home was repossessed. I had nowhere to live. So I had a ticket, but I was homeless. I had a few nights sleeping on the beach, nowhere really to go, kind of in and out of my parents' house a little bit, but not giving them kind of the full story. And I flew to Australia with a couple of bags and a laptop. And whilst I was in Australia, um, I started to do online recruitment. I just I just got mocked up a website and started to recruit people into Virgin, Barclays, through my network, other people I knew. So I was
It's
actually,
initially tapping into contacts that you'd had from previous roles. Yeah, makes sense, of course. Yeah.
yeah, 100%. So no recruitment experience. So it does make me laugh a little bit these days when I speak to recruiters. Do you know what I mean? I was quite successful laying on a beach having no clue how to do it. Yeah, so again, just that I suppose that drive. So I've got to do something and give it a go. What's the worst that can happen? It was a very dark time. So I came back, I lived at home for a bit, had some decisions to make, and started to do contract work, recruiting, training, and then eventually kind of built back up again. And then through some connections and a couple of friends, got a long-term contract with Virgin, which turned Virgin Media, it was then, back into a full-time role. And then from that full-time role, then I went and worked for a consultancy called Blue Sky, and worked there for just shy of 5 years. And that kind of tapped into all the great stuff that I used to love back in the day around learning, building programs, helping leadership teams, helping management, all the stuff that years ago I really loved. And it had some amazing success, with big firms, won awards, and again, great bunch of people, well, most of them. There were redundancies again there, and also a bit of an irony that what I found was that some of the leaders in that organisation were talking with one hand and saying the other. So we'd sit around a client table talking about culture, and then the irony being that the culture in the organisation had gone through the toilet because it had been sold into Capita. But as I say,
Lost identity as a result, which is sadly it's too often the case, isn't it? Where even when
yeah,
businesses start out small and they grow, they lose that culture piece, but they certainly obviously do when it's bought up by a big conglomerate, sort of thing. It happens
yeah,
naturally, and people often say, don't they, that what I miss about the job is not actually the job itself, it's the people, and the people make the culture. So there's such a ripple effect, isn't there, that
yeah.
causes more
Oh,
chaos than what could
yeah,
actually be.
fantastic people in terms of their capability and skill, and I've got massive respect. Mark, who's was the initial MD of Blue Sky, fantastic guy, but obviously he moved on as part of that sale, and it kind of just went downhill fast, really. And to this day, kind of there are people that've got different versions of their experience of that. So it was quite sad in a way that it ended as it did. However, what it did demonstrate is when I had a client and when I had an individual in front of me, it gave me this framework to go, actually, this is a thing that I know I can do and I do well, when given license to. So I was about to start up on my own. And then I had a conversation, and you meet another person in your life. Had a conversation with Adrian Harvey, who was CEO of Elephants Don't Forget, which is an AI tech platform. We had a great conversation, and I went to work for him for a couple of years. COVID hit, so we had to do a lot of pivoting, and it was a lot of kind of moving things around to get the business where it needed to be. But they've gone on strength to strength, and it was the right time to then set up on my own, and start my company, Different Edge Performance. And 2.5 years in, and it's going okay. So I now spend my days doing what I love, helping leaders, helping managers, helping businesses make things simple, sell more, create good cultures and customer service environments. And I've got clients as well that I just help just achieve things they want. Not that I'm a genius, but I just help them with the tools, the conversations to move them from where they are to where they could be. And this week I've done a keynote at the big property event. So it's varied, it's interesting, and it's all on me again because I'm self-employed. So we're back to there again. So that's the arc. That's the.
This is such a great thing about what the show is to me. That you get to tap in, and you see what the common denominators are between all different stories. You see the trends, but also you see the absolute uniqueness, and that is quite some journey. And you've touched on some. And by the way, thanks for sharing that, Dan, and so candidly.
No
You touched
worries.
on some key facets, about what this podcast is all about. You mentioned the words resilience. That plays really strongly on the bounce back ability, which goes into when you said about the redundancies. And I think quite, if I broadly from when I look at that and the notes that I've made there, great point that you kicked off with. That careers, do they really exist? Is it more that it's squiggly and that you go as you find as you come and you go into things? You do obviously meet people that they know from a very early age what they're going to do, but that seems more the exception than the rule. And maybe they lose out on something because there's so many people that you meet along the way that send you and pin and bounce you back into different directions.
Mm.
So much there that you've tapped into, and with what you're doing with Different Edge, can I just ask, is that I would guess, if you're working with individuals, leaders, teams, I would guess that a lot of your work is keeping businesses agile and lean, in the tools that they use, lean methodology. And if that is from you nodding, particularly people who are listening to the podcast with only the audio, that seems like I'm tapping onto something. But with that, it seems like there's no better man, because from what you've said, you've adapted and you've reinvented yourself several different times. And, I think staying agile and lean, there's many strings to that. But if there's one thing, and I've worked in operational excellence teams, so I can speak a bit to this, it's the ability to reinvent, starting from scratch again or reinventing something that's already good. It doesn't have to be bad. It can be good, but you can reinvent something that's already got a really good strength to take it to the next level. So really interesting there, mate. What I want to tap into though, on that theme of resilience, then you've mentioned that that reinvention of certain different things, the chance moments, meeting different people, going from one business to another, one industry to another, being demoted from management to assistant manager with those clipboard warriors. What kind of
Yeah.
themes then have you found, if you reflect? And I may be putting you on the spot a little bit, but with those themes of resilience, is there anything that you found you can establish as a framework, or is a lot of it just really going as you
Yeah.
find and taking the punches and having good people around you?
Good. So on that, so no particular order, but first of all, I think you've got to have a really strong. Sounds a bit twee with the Simon Sinek kind of, but you've got to have a strong why. Why are you doing what you're doing? Why do you need? What's the purpose? What's the drive? So now I've got 4 children. It's a bloody obvious drive. Do you know what I mean? It's kind of like, do I really want to be doing? Yes. Well, I'm not. It's not a choice, but the drive to do something is when things get tough. That's the thing that keeps me going. So that why is clear. Then and this is something I'm working.
Start with why I changed my methodology in so many different ways. Just had to drop that in there.
Yeah, no, 100%. Yeah, because we often and also knowing what you want is key. But I mean, we're already great at saying. I mean, I'm particularly good at what I don't want, but what is it you want? And then that really a clear, defined goal. And again, I'm constantly working to align that. I mean, it's the end of the year, and I've got 2 weeks over Christmas. I'm yet to kind of clarify in my mind what 26 really needs to achieve. So define that goal. You mentioned earlier, Joe, but like people to lean on. Part of that strategy needs to be involving others. It absolutely needs to. You need to involve other people, and don't be shy about drawing on their experience, asking for help, and that is critical. And most people will kind of go, yeah, let's have a conversation, right? And if they don't, and they're the opposite, then there's nothing lost. And then self belief. I think all that, that's why I love the kind of premise of your pod, because without that self belief, sometimes other people can kind of give you a little bit of that. But going through the scenarios, everyone's squiggly life, you've got to draw upon that stuff, because that's the stuff that you draw self belief upon and go, well, actually, if this messes up, what's the worst that can happen? No one's really going to die. There are worse things, going on in the world. And yeah, and something tells me I've done it before, I'll kind of do it again. So what happens Monday? Yeah, and that sometimes, I mean, I sometimes go to the extreme, like the kind of like I'm just a speck of something floating on a cold rock in the middle of nowhere. No one's ever going to remember. So, and when the more you push yourself to do that stuff, you do realise that no one really gives a shit. And they go, they're not really fussed, Be like, there'll be the odd person that points out when you don't go, I don't. I remember I launched a whole website, and one person, lovely person, contacted me to say, I don't like the colour of your website. And then, but 20 years ago, you'd have gone, oh, maybe, but now you just go, that must be very difficult for you. Do you know what I mean?
And I appreciate not everyone's got our mindset of maintaining optimism. The start with why with the Simon Sinek, and if your why is strong enough, you'll figure out the how. But I caveat, well, not necessarily caveat that, but I counter when someone gives you the odd hater comment. That's always going to be the case. But I'd probably say the first sign of progress, or the first part of progress, is being noticed, isn't it?
Yeah,
So with the right mindset, it's a form of feedback. And I've mentioned this in previous episodes here, that if people are giving you commentary, or giving you a negative comment, it's a good sign to me. I picture that story. I picture a picture in my head where come in and taste this coffee, which was the worst coffee that a woman rated on TripAdvisor. You just can't kill it. It's still a form of negative feedback. There's always going to be haters, but you can always churn it and make it to your advantage, or take it to your advantage in some way, shape, or form.
yeah,
Um, yeah, optimism goes a long way, but this plays a big part into the trend then that you were talking about with resilience. Having a strong enough why,
yeah.
taking
And I think,
action, and having the belief.
we the old premise, we suffer more in our imagination than in reality.
Mm.
So, you know, I can make this very simple and let it go. And as you get older, and things happen, you've got perspective. And trying to coach, and I mean, I've got a 16-year-old, and trying to coach that is probably a bit of a non-starter, because he's not had the life experience to draw upon to go, no, you're right. This too shall pass. And I'm reaching a very not zen like a state, but things my wife would probably say different, but things don't really bother me like they used to. And ultimately, I am the arbiter of my own actions. So once I know what actions are there, and I start taking those actions, the results are out of my hands. So I kind of just work through, and you know what will be will be.
And Dan, has that always been something that's kind of always been there in your personality, or has that been a series of experiences? I mean, I've got a good understanding of how you've looked at things and how you've kind of went with the flow in a very positive and constructive way and dropped in the frameworks. But that way of achieving, Zen mentality and, what will be, this too shall pass. I think, obviously, from a lot of people that I've spoken to, it's life experience that, eventually gets you to that state. You're not necessarily born with that mindset. You eventually
Yeah.
realize, what, of all of those situations, it wasn't as bad. But from your perspective, has that been something that, again, has naturally come with time? And
Naturally come
certain
with time.
circumstances,
Yes.
failures have encouraged that, or certain successes
Yeah.
even?
We can all go to dark places, can't we? We can all be very introspective, but I think that life experience gives you so many things to pull upon, so many things to compare it to, that you arrive at that place. And then I'm sure when I'm kind of like 10 years from now, I'll probably be the same. Um, I wanted to, and you do meet fantastic people as you go through life, but you also meet some people that you just think, how are you? How are you here? What are you doing? And when I was younger, I don't suffer fools gladly. Now, I used to think that was a huge burden, because I used to think, why is it always me having these conversations? Everyone thinks it, but I've just said it. And all these cowards behind me are kind of going, well, yeah, no, you're right. well, why don't you just back me up then? Well, and it's funny because I was with a leadership team last year, senior leadership team, and the kind of people that 20 years ago I'd have thought, wow, they're on huge salaries, they must know something I don't. And they're all sitting around a table, and one of them said about the CEO's new program. None of them were behind it, and one of the guys said, "Well, why don't you say something? We're talking about kind of culture and that." And he said, "Because I'm not stupid. I'm just going to sit tight." And in the past, that would have like really brushed me up the wrong way. I was like, "How can you sit there and not?" But now we kind of go, "Yeah, everyone has to choose their own their own fields to plough. It's not my field to get involved with." So you have to let stuff go sometimes a bit more than maybe you did when you were younger.
So I guess take the conversation now is, back to Different Edge and what you're doing with teams at the moment. I've talked to a couple of previous guests about this kind of topic on how do you then replicate success? What does you said about individually what your themes are within success briefly and kind of themes to resilience. But with your approach, I guess it stems from a belief as to what served you well and what you believe, is replicatable, if that's even a word. But when you're
Yeah,
working with individuals, teams, and leaders, talk to me a little bit about your approach as to how you're systemically setting them up for success and how they can then take the torch that you give them and, so to speak, pass that on.
yeah, 100%. Yeah, I mean, there is a golden thread that goes through all this, and you'll know yourself. There's the kind of, there's the real hard behavioural science stuff that you'd be fool not to tap into without getting too kind of, down a road with it. But there are ways that leaders and managers can pull levers, can nudge people to consider. And one of the things I always, when I work with a team to start off with, is you've got to set your stall out that people will always do what people ultimately want to do. It's just a truth, okay? So if you want people to behave in a certain way, you want to achieve something together, there are some real levers and nudges that are fairly straightforward to implement. Doesn't mean they're going to go that way, but if you don't start there and you're not aware of it, I don't know how you can lead people to kind of get behind a common cause. Um, and also personal responsibility, I think, is a huge thing. I say to leaders all the time, and again, this is why I'm not for everybody, Joe. I say, look, let's start where we need to start, okay? You signed the contract. You get paid the money. If you don't want the extra burden or the effort to take the responsibility on for this, just give the money back. Go. And no one, of course, no one wants to do that. So maybe we should start there, okay? You took the money. No one had a gun to your head. So let's start there. Why are you doing it? That's the intent. What is your intent for leading and managing teams? Let's start there. Why are you doing it? How are you benefiting from it? And a question I always ask is, how am I better off working for you? So, how does it benefit? Yeah. How does it benefit me? If I'm in your team, how does it benefit me as opposed to working for Joe? What is it you're doing or putting in place? And it takes some people longer to kind of get there, but personal responsibility, it starts with you, because invariably they start off talking about they, kind of, well, our people, they won't do this and they can't. Well, hold on, let's start middle pedal, let's start with you. What haven't we got right? Where have we started from? How have we communicated it? And then when we've given people the tools and the environment and all the support they need, then we might move to, okay, well, what's going on there? So I'm quite pragmatic about it. I think there's a lot of, can I say bullshit, but a lot of bullshit around, you know,
Right.
we get into jobs, people with lofty titles come along, and it's just a conversation. But there's a way to have a conversation, and that benefits everybody, and there's a way that's not. If you want to spend 5 minutes talking about some ways you might improve and be more helpful to that person, let's do that. If you don't really care, then go on and fall on your own sword, and what will be will be. So I'm quite pragmatic about it. Like I say, unapologetically simple, but I base a lot of my stuff in 30 years of experience, but also kind of reading, and it's funny actually, because in this kind of world, people go, we're trying to do something unique. We haven't got to. And actually, if you look at most people's reading material, it's not that unique. We've mentioned Simon Sinek like 3 times. Um, and most L&D teams up and down the country kind of go, well, we'll start with why, So
Yeah.
it's not that unique. But I always say to all the teams, it's not that it's right or it's wrong. It's just most helpful in the situation you find yourself in. So if you think it's helpful, let's start there. If you don't, you think it's a load of old crap, that's cool too. But if it's not that, what might it be? And then we'll go from there. So I'm not wed to any particular kind of, I have a golden thread with provable, demonstrable things that seem to work. But I'm also absolutely okay for someone to go, this is a load of, and I'm not gonna. Cool, no worries. Why don't we just have a conversation, Dan and Joe? What do you want to do? Then? What do you
Is
really
it
want?
is it fair to say, Dan, that again, I relatively speaking, don't always feel comfortable speaking on behalf of people or putting words in their mouth, and I'm not trying to do that here. But from my perception of what you're saying, then, and I've got a lot of friends that speak quite black and white, and they always say lands me into trouble, and I don't ever really understand why. But is it fair to say that you just kind of do the basics really well? Don't over-engineer things, just do the simple things right, let people know why they're here, communicate to them, give them daily messages, be
Yeah.
transparent, lay out the
Well, of course.
foundations. And you can
Yeah, I
deliver
think
that
so.
with the right level of emotional intelligence. You can still deliver quite a firm message, but in quite a fair and pragmatic and way that lands.
Yeah, I think that, and that's it. And again, we're talking about buzzwords of this, that, kind of emotional intelligence, and but I'm fascinated by language. Like I have empathy for people, and to be empathy from the Latin in pain. So I mean, you have to find a common ground with someone to go, look, if I'm in your shoes, I kind of get why you feel like that. Most of it's fear based. Back to all the stuff I used to. So that's why I do have empathy, where I felt out of my depth or looking around a table. I ran a team at one point of 20 odd people, all of them university educated. And remember, I don't have one GCSE. So, so that kind of complex of, should I really, am I qualified to do this? And then you realize it's not about pieces of paper. They're great. I met someone recently. I coach teams regularly and business owners. If you were from the stalwart of a CIPD coaching certificate, think you'd probably tear your eyes out at my methods. But I spoke to someone recently, and they said, I've spent £15,000 on a coaching qualification. Yet these things that you're doing, I really love. Where do you get them from? And I said, well, coaching for me is thumbs up, just reinforcing what you want. So you spent 15 grand, and I've just done that. So it's kind of like,
Might have just spotted from the logo of the podcast or on my LinkedIn that I love me a thumbs up. So you are talking my language, my man, with that kind of
yeah, of
language.
course, you have to be, I think leadership is a craft, management is a craft, being able to communicate really effectively is a craft. It's something you learn. I'm very passionate about questions, right? And I firmly believe, Joe, that the right question at the right time to the right person can change your life. Yeah. Um, and I've got 3 or 4 examples in my life of when that's happened. So if you're able to be brave enough and have courage to ask the question, you have the craft and you've practiced enough times where you ask a very good question that gets that person to think, crazy things start to happen. But if you don't really care, you don't think about it, or you never ask it, you're likely to stay where you are.
It's always just standing still, and if you're standing still, you're going backwards, kind of thing, isn't it? So it's being brave to have that difficult conversation. And again, I don't want to drown us in buzzwords or corporate speech, but they are very relevant for a good reason. Once again, Dan, thanks for sharing your insights there. What I wanted to touch on as well. So I think there's quite a lot of parallels. I mean, I'm in the training world, training management, so I've kind of made that step into overseeing the strategy of training as opposed to just delivering it now. Although I've always had my views on how to strategize it, I'm now in that position to be able to do so. And you said a lot of things there that cross over, I think, with just general management and how to deliver good training as well. Whether you are a training manager or if you're a manager of let's say, a warehouse, again, completely different fields. If you're in operations or if you're in trainings, I see some parallels where when I was a trainer and still am, but I'm more so stepping back and overseeing it holistically now, managing the function. But when I always lead training sessions, the why, I always tell myself, and I remind myself of that Simon Sinek book that I read, Start with Why. If the why is strong enough, the how will present itself. And I always bake that into my training, that if I always make it clear why people are in the room, they'll buy into my credibility. If you know why
Yeah.
you're here, then when I tell you how to do your job, in terms of when I'm training with you the skills, you'll lean in and it'll give me more credibility. The empathy piece plays a massive part in that as well. A lot of people that I've trained, I've always tried to put it on a slant of I've been in your shoes. So I've always tried to train what I've worked in previously. There are a few things where I've thrown myself in completely, never known it, learned it. But wherever there was a possibility to say, look, guys, I've been in your shoes, I always wanted to bake that in. And where I'm going with this is my individual kind of approach, and I don't think it's just me, but certainly I'll speak for myself. My approach to kind of passing on knowledge and imparting wisdom, inspiring action as a result of that, is creating not only a place where you share the right knowledge, you give the tools to people, you create the environment for that to manifest, and for that people to become, or for someone that I've just taught, for them to replicate it themselves and then make it more self-directed learning, inspire action, because that's what I see a trainer being there. An interception or giving you the baseline for you to then run with the ball. And I think a lot of things is management is that, right? It's giving the fundamentals, it's creating the environment. It's not just giving you the right communication on this is how you do your job, this is how you report in, we're going to have catch-ups. It's inspiring action as a result of that, isn't it? Wanted to ask you off the back of that, and again, apologies for the long-winded speech, but what are your takes on when you're working with teams, the emphasis of not just communicating well, but creating the right environment for success to replicate itself?
I mean, I think you've summed it up there really, but I mean, it's one of the four pillars when I work with the team, we call it create the climate. So you've got this culture thing, which is big, wieldy thing that no one really, if you work for Microsoft, your culture is literally the manager you work for. So if you're leading teams, we talk about that climate, that little weather system that you can operate in every day. And like I say, it's back to those basics. Is if I followed you in your slipstream leading a team, and I start in your team tomorrow, how would I know what the ground rules of behaviour and expectation were? And very rarely do I get people really confident that they've done that. They've got the corporate, they've got the induction spiel, they've got the values on the wall, but actually, have you sat me down and go, for example, okay, so this is something that happens quite a lot. How would you just in everyday life deal with this? Oh, okay. Well, what we tend to find is what is unacceptable in this business is this kind of behavior around it. Actually, this seems to work well. So just be mindful of that as you're going through. And then I trust you to kind of make the right decision, but in that kind of area. People get it, but often people don't set those rules. They just go through the tick, 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 tick. Like I said, report into this. We have a meeting here. And one-to-ones, don't get me started on that. But, the ground rules are. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because the managers hate doing them and everyone hates attending them. So why are we doing them? So climate is I need to feel supported. I need to feel challenged. And I also need to know the rules of engagement, that when I'm sitting and I've got to make a decision, I've almost got the kind of manager on my shoulder, not in a directive way, but to go, okay, do I feel, is it 8, 9 or 10 confidence that I could explain my judgment on this and my intent behind it, and I know they go, that's cool. But when you don't know, that's when people kind of stretch things too far. They make decisions without knowing they've made a bad decision and find themselves in hot water. So yeah, you're right. The climate around how we operate, and people make mistakes, and it's a cohesive group of individuals that have all got different points of view and perspectives. But if we know a ground rule, for example, client does X, what's acceptable, what's not acceptable, what's the grey, 50 shades of grey on this? Well, okay. And when you've got that story, is to share it with the team and say, right, this has happened. This is the area of grey. What do we want to do moving forward? Because if it happens to you next time as a team, what's our rule of thumb? There might not be a definitive yes answer, but where do we want to lean on this? Okay, we'll always check in. So you're kind of crafting, and it's movable as you go. But if you don't do it, it's funny, isn't it, that teams always do every weekly, monthly, quarterly audits, but they don't do behavioural audits. And I always think, well, if you sat down every 3 months and gone, right, how accountable have we been this month? how moany have we been on a scale of 1 to 10? Well, actually, we've been really bloody moany. All I've heard is moan. And if you're doing more of that stuff, you don't have to be kind of demonstrative with it, but you can have a bit of a laugh with it. But it is important. That's the lubrication when the rubber hits the road that makes things happen. So I'm on with you that creating the climate for things to happen is critical.
That's the culture piece, isn't it? What goes into success? I think it's having the tools, having the skill set, having the knowledge, and that's where I speak from my perspective in my profession. But yeah, just the literal skills and the knowledge and being taught that, for me, that's not enough. That's really the spark. And I think the environment that you host and create is the systemic shift that you're trying to create long
Yeah.
term. And this is what I'm really interested in when I talk to people about their careers, what their views are on creating not only tools to pass on knowledge, but how do they create that environment for people to be receptive to their ideas. I can have all the right ideas. I want people to buy into my approach, but I need to create an environment where people feel that they can gravitate towards that thought, be vulnerable, and have that trust in me as someone that they've only just met 5 minutes ago. Or if you've
Yeah.
switched teams and you've gone into a new management position or a new manager overseeing you, God, I've gone from one shift to another. I'm a bit standoff from this guy. How is he going to introduce me? That leans into the environment that new leader creates for that team member. So yeah, it's an
Yeah,
ongoing shift. There's
100%.
so many variables, and it's really interesting to get people's takes on it.
I don't know if you find, I mean, maybe so this from an L&D perspective, of that maybe you've created that environment in your team, or maybe you've got people going through like an academy or an induction, and you kind of create that sense of, openness, and then they leave and go into the operation, and then they go into a team that is the complete, like you said, a complete opposite of that.
Yeah, yeah.
So they've
Completely.
been used to, maybe they've been used to a certain type of environment. Now they've been thrown in where two managers are, treating them like 5-year-olds, and they're like, hold on, there's a disconnect here. It felt like that in that part of the organisation, and now I'm here. I mean, I work with a business where you'd probably argue that the training team are kind of forward thinking, quite not casual, but like grown up, open dialogue, communication, ask no questions, a silly question, all the kind of basic stuff. And then they go into quite a regulated environment, and they've got some of the managers that call them their babies, and they treat them
As
and they
such.
won't allow them to make any mistakes, where they spent a month in academy talking about accountability, and so there's always a disconnect between those two things. And I always still to this day I scratch my head around how does that happen so quickly in businesses, and who isn't having the right conversation with the right people, and we just kind of like turn a blind eye, and then it causes confusion everywhere. So no, I certainly feel your pain on that.
Good to know that that's I'm not the only one, but I'm sure I'm not
No,
only.
it's common.
But nice to hear it from a horse's mouth, so to speak. Thanks for that, buddy. So, and also, slightly, well, completely different to what we were talking about there, but I'll pick up on a personal point that you mentioned. Nice to speak to someone who also has 4 children. It's very rare because we're in the same boat there. It's very rare. It's usually the
Yeah,
case when I say four, people lean back. Oh my God, four, and you soon get used to it. Yeah, I know I'm crazy. So nice to be in the company of someone
four
that's unlike.
boys.
Oh, well, 3 girls and a boy, so different
Oh, I think,
perspectives, but
yeah,
all fun and games, eh?
it is. Yeah, I've
And
got enough for a five-a-side football team. Just
yeah,
yeah,
well, there you go. So we talk about bounces a lot on on this show. Of course, it's a key facet of the message that we're pushing out. But in our households, I suppose bouncing off the walls literally occurs every day.
yeah. I get that. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And that again, and women and men, but I can only come from a man's perspective. I'm self-employed, and the ups and downs. You've got the economy, all the things you can't control, and yet you've still got to put food on the table. You've still got to be that dad that's got to find the energy to kind of have those conversations in the evening, particularly with the older ones.
Yeah,
Like my older one does jiu-jitsu, for example. There are days he just doesn't want it. We're off the football later for the middle one. I don't want to be standing there but it's the resilience. I keep saying to my
yeah,
15-year-old, you are getting punched in the face or choked out, but you are doing something that no one within a 10-mile radius of you is doing. And that will come to fruition in 2 or 3 years' time when you really need it most. It's not now that you recognise that you need it, but it will be the day where you go, oh, thank God, I got punched in the face every Thursday and Wednesday.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's literally that. My eldest, she goes to kickboxing, and it was something, we kind of responded. Me and Mum responded to her personality. I do it with all my kids to expose them to martial arts. Where they take a kick, they take a blow, because there's a message within that, right, with the resilience. But with her personality particularly, we were conscious of really want to bring something out on her because I don't want her to struggle in certain respects, and that's the juggling act of parenting, isn't it? Adapting, what's the cohesive message you want for all your kids, but also what's the way that you nip and tuck and adapt to each of their personalities. There's common denominators, but there's also versatile approaches you need to apply to both. I don't want to get trapped into that maze while we're talking. I'll park that off camera. But there's a message in that, and people might say, "Well, it's all good and well, Dan, talking about resilience. We hear about it all the time in corporate speech. How do I go about that?" I would say it's the exposure to struggle, isn't it? Mike Tyson said everyone's got a plan until they get punched in the face. It's good to
Yeah.
take the blows, quite literally, in the cases of sport, both combat and non-direct, direct sport. There is some form of struggle in it, and the struggle in sport, particularly for footballers, let's say, any outdoors weather or any outdoor sport, is the winter. That's the struggle. That's what cultivates resilience, struggle. And you want to protect your kids in certain respects, and you want to protect yourself as well. But when you look at your own career, you think, well, yeah, I threw myself into situations where I had the confidence, but I exposed myself to struggle, and I guess that's what I want for my kids. So there's loads that go into this mix, mate, and I'm speaking as I find. Don't get me wrong, this wasn't a preconceived speech that I had.
Yeah, no,
But I think that's probably
100%.
how you cultivate resilience, isn't it? Exposure
I
to
think so.
struggle, but within frameworks, so to speak.
Yeah, and I think resilience comes from, and again, maybe going a bit deep, but maybe I didn't realise I was doing it in my younger years. But you've got to go with your, what's the word? Your soul. You've got to go with what you believe is right. Now, if data and facts kind of point different, you might kind of, but often when it comes to left or right, going forward, staying still, you'll get all the advice in the world from your parents
Yeah,
or friends but you just know as a human being, there are times when intrinsically you just know this is what, and everything will tell you, everyone's fighting against it. And I think what you're trying to do is you're trying to create an environment for your children to, there are ground rules. You have to come off the Xbox at this time because so we have that conversation, but also know when to step back. And this is the same when you lead teams, is knowing but that you are not the arbiter of how they feel. They're the navigator of their own ship.
yeah,
And and deep in your soul sometimes when you're sitting at a table with you thinking, do you know what? Everyone's against me on this, but there's just something I know I've got to see it through, or I've got to make that move, and I'll have to be responsible for the outcome. But resilience comes in the fact of I have that self-belief that I'm going to move forward with it. That then gives me that resilience. If I'm just cast away, I have no idea what I think, and I'm at the behest of everyone else's opinion, view, and then that's difficult to be resilient because you don't know who to kind of blame, and you kind of, oh, they told me this. Resilience comes from, no, I'm going with it. I'm going to keep going, pushing through. I often scream at the TV when it comes to deal or no deal. I think once you've made the decision, you've got to keep going through to the end.
it's
They always
not an
ask the,
analogy. I guess it is in a way. Yeah, I've never thought of deal or no
they
deal
always
that
ask the
way. If
people,
you played your hand, you've got to keep on going, and
yeah,
just
they always
hopefully I
ask the
don't
people
land.
with the boxes. They go, well, what do you think? They go, well, like those people know. Just keep going.
Yeah, just
Um,
as long as I don't finish my working life and my retirement pot's got is the penny box, as long as that's the
exactly.
case.
Resilience comes from knowing yourself a bit more and going, do you know what? It's not just the things that happen to me, but I think I can be resilient because I'm prepared to do it, not knowing what happens next. And that in itself builds the resilience muscle, I believe.
Yeah, in doing so, you're changing the perception of failure, isn't it? And failure and success. I think the general argument, not the lazy argument. It's been thrown at that, but I wouldn't go that far. But I'd say the general argument is that failure is the opposite to success. Don't know what your thoughts are on here, but I'd definitely invite it. But my take is, that failure isn't the opposite to success. It's within success. It's within the model. It's just the hurdle within the journey towards success. If you think everything's going to be plain sailing, especially when you're chartering new ground, then obviously there's going to be some sort of failure. But failure is a teaching tool. It's a guidance. Just like again when you go to
Yeah.
school, yeah, you're setting yourself up for failure, but as long as you've got the right frameworks, the right systems, and the right people to rely and bounce back on, it's a tool to get you to success, not the opposite of
Yeah.
success.
But it feels like again, that language is important. Failure. If we were to really sit back and analyse it, what is failure? Do you know what I mean? Like, what is failure? It's only that thing that in that moment you go, what, if I could achieve that, that would be success. But all those things along the way, if you're being really kind of pragmatic about it, success was deciding to do it. Success was making
Yeah.
that move. Success was being alive the following day to then see that thing through. So there's lots of success, and I think people do get hung up on. You see it on like LinkedIn and places like this. Success, failure. Christ, do you know what I mean? Like, I don't know when my time's up. If I get hit by a bus tomorrow, is that failure? Is that success? That I don't know. Do you know what I mean? It's like, so all you can do is wake up in the morning, put one foot in front of another, find something that you're relatively interested in, you think will make a difference to yourself or to your family or to the people around you, give it your very best, and we'll see what happens. And failure, I don't know. Sometimes I wonder, we live in a world of, don't we, like absolutes, failure, success. Who's
It's
successful? Is success the person that wins an Oscar, becomes a millionaire, and then blows their brains out? Is that success? I don't know.
very open-ended question, and again, one of the reasons why I launched the podcast, to change that perception and open up the conversations. This isn't a pod where it's about preaching. I never wanted it to land that way. I wanted it to be that through frank and open and just genuine conversations, it gives people the snippets that they take out of it, where they can say, yeah, that seems like something that I might be interested in. It fuels their curiosity, and I think that goes back to what we were talking about earlier. If I can have a strong enough why, lead with a bit of curiosity, follow on something that I'm speculatively interested in, it can then set the wheels in motion for everything else that comes.
One
So
hundred
that's why I
percent. And
wanted
with
to
that,
start that.
yeah, I'm kind of just thinking about time, but like curiosity, for example. I mean, when you start delving into the amount of studies that have been done on curiosity, under an MRI scanner, under a brain scanner, where when you start that investigative mindset, again, it all sounds like kind of like training speak, but it's real life stuff happens. Kind of from a dopamine perspective, and all the science tells you that. The more curious you are, the more time you spend in questions, not knowing rather than knowing, you'll find you are going to be more resilient to change. And what it shows in the brain is your brain changes its shape to not only learn what you're learning now, but primes it for future learning. So you're more likely to remember something than people that don't ask questions. So curiosity is a fascinating topic. So much so, I'm in the early stages of writing a book about it. um,
I
so
really can't know. It's the worst plan ever. It's not even a plan. I'm very curious to find out more. And maybe we'll do a bit more chat offline. Maybe a few through a few LinkedIn posts. Please do
yeah,
share the
100%.
story. But
Yeah.
I want to just draw the line under this part of the pod. And look, I think it's been really eye-opening, this particular part. Not that any others haven't. But I think just what you said there, with curiosity creates then the environment for future learning. That goes back to what we were saying earlier about it's not just about getting the skills, it's having the right conditions for learning
Yeah.
to happen in the first place. So curiosity, powerful tool. And yeah, while it might have killed the cat, it kept it coming back for more, and it kept on there being, it kept the cat resilient, I guess.
Yeah, well, there you go. So you asked a question. I asked a group of the property professionals this week, what does curiosity kill? And they said the cat. Well, actually, what curiosity kills your curse of knowledge. It kills what you think you know about the things in front of you. And we all see the world through different lenses. And when you're in a training environment or a work environment, sometimes curiosity, 99% of people will just go, yeah, okay. Yeah, and I think I know what curiosity is. But when you start to delve into some of these things and you see we're all complex human beings, and you see the science, what's actually going on in your head and your body, all of a sudden you go, actually, what? And I can actually activate this curiosity, let's call it curiosity, and this is the stuff that it does to me. And over a longer term, it does this that improves X, Y, and Z. Ooh. But of course, like all of us, we're all lazy. We all think we know it. And do you really want to invest time in curiosity? I don't know. So if you do, great. Hopefully there'll be a book next year on it. But if not, then stay with your curse of knowledge and knowing what you know, because you limit your sphere of possibility by not asking questions. You'll only ever reach for the most obvious answer. and most organisations do. I forgive me, Joe, but I actually get paid for this. So sometimes I do a meeting audit,
Okay.
and so I'm working with a firm. Sometimes I'll just do a 5 bar gate. I'll go along to some of their meetings, and I'll see how many statements are made compared to questions and follow-up questions. And currently, the last 33 I've done, as a percentage, it's 74% statements. So people just telling people things in meetings, not actually asking questions. And if
That's
you're
interesting.
and we talk about climate and culture, if you've got a culture of just telling people stuff and then them listening and then telling you stuff, it's not opening up that sphere of curiosity where the solution to your business problem is just out of reach, and then people close it down and then they walk out the room. And I find that fascinating.
I guess with that kind of order, it doesn't necessarily tell you, or well, sorry, it does tell you that business isn't necessarily set up for creative thinking. If the overwhelming majority of it is not dictatorial, but it's more telling as opposed to creating future systems and sparking curiosity, creating new solutions to problems. If the minority is questions being asked, not much can flourish if only the minority of things are being asked, not told. So I might have to follow up with you on that because that's something that I've not looked into, but I've been exposed to similar sort of situations where other people have done similar. But that's interesting to hear those kind of stats, and I can believe it very much so as
Yeah,
well when you think about
yeah.
this could have been a email, the meetings that occurred, and maybe some questions might have come off of it. I'm not sure. Um, so, I suppose swiftly taking us into the very final part of today's pod, Dan, we do have a closing tradition on the pod where the last
Yes.
guest I had asks a question or passes on a question to me off camera, and I then ask that on their behalf to the next guest. So, first and foremost, the first question, this isn't the question. Are you ready for the question?
I'm ready for the question. Yes, I think.
100%. I think. Please feel free to take a moment to think. I know I'm putting people on the spot when I do ask it. So, if you could clone yourself, Dan, what is one feature of your personality which has helped you achieve success? Maybe it's only a one-off, or maybe it's systemically. But what area of your personality that's helped you achieve success would you super enhance in your clone, and why?
Yeah, I think it's
These
one of
questions
two.
get more and more expansive as they go. I promise, they really do.
Yeah, I think it's one of two. And I think maybe so. The first one, I'm just going to just premise the first one. The ability to, excuse my French, kind of just not really care for the opinion of others too much. Like I said before, I think, that's caused me issues in when I was young, but also in the round, it's been a huge benefit not to
Been
drag,
able to
not to be
siphon influence.
swayed by, yeah.
Yeah.
But that has caused a lot of ups and downs. So I think if I had to really superimpose, and believe it or not, I can be quite humorous. I would say that since I was very young, the ability to make other people laugh or make
Okay.
groups of people laugh,
Yeah.
um, I do think that some people do have an innate ability to do it. And it sounds a bit kind of like egotistical, but I do have so when I was at school, I used to sit in classrooms and I used to think, right, in a moment, I'm going to say something and everybody is going to laugh. And I'd think about it in a split second and go, right here and now, and then I'd say it. And through my working life, I think that maybe that kind of strayed a little bit too much, but I think the ability to have humour, the ability to make people feel at ease through humour, and the people to be a little bit self-deprecating through humour has got me through not only work, and it's got me jobs before, and it's kind of made friends, but it's also got me out at least one very potentially violent situation whilst on holiday. so, so I think if I could ratchet it up and superpower it's the ability to have humour, the appropriate humour, and be quite kind of an element of wit that gets the other person, disarms the other person, and they go, oh, actually, he's okay.
That strikes me as a very, again, not trying to be a walking cliche, I promise. But again, it is the balance, isn't it? And I think those two kind of perspectives that you give there, the being black and white, saying as it is, filtering out the noise and what the things are to listen to, and saying it how it is, but also having the humour kind of is the perfect balance, right? It's being able to, because if you go too far in the direction of being the class clown and saying
Yeah.
too many jokes, maybe when you say something that's more serious or warrants, a bit more,
Oh,
maybe we just
100%.
need to consider that. Maybe it gets lost because, it came from Dan. He's a joker.
Agree.
You don't want to
100%.
lose that, but at the same
Yep.
time, you don't want to be seen as the person that only throws up commentary and says it very straight laced. You want to deliver it in a very droll and humorous way where that can build relationships. And obviously, that's a big part of business, isn't it? Managing relationships, building relationships. That's how business is done, right? In any way, shape, or form. So it seems that you've got the balance there in terms of how you
Well,
approach it.
not always.
Not
Humor
always,
subjective.
not always,
Humor
and
subjective,
don't
of
always make it
course.
easy. It depends on the environment. We've said about it. The environment that we're walking into. Is it best to say something straight laced here? Is it
Wow.
something to crack a
Yeah.
joke?
So what do they say? Pippa Grange says 70% of our behaviour is the environment we find ourselves in. So
Exactly.
of
Yeah.
course there are some things you'd say and you do that you wouldn't do in other groups. But you know what, Joe? There are times when most people wouldn't say it, but maybe those people need a little bit more humour in the situation. They're taking
Quite
themselves
right.
just a little bit too seriously.
Quite right. Reading the room, being perceptive, another key characteristic towards success, eh? And just without and stopping yourself from going crazy. But again, that can be another episode that we talk about. Dan, absolute pleasure talking to you today, mate. I genuinely mean that, and I say it every single time with every single guest because I'm now talking to so many people from different perspectives. It's not just in the training space, the management space, working with leaders. It's really, really been refreshing to hear some insights, and I'm looking forward to maybe potentially having another episode with you at some point in the near future. I think we've given
I love
enough
that.
where there's loads to touch on in a bit more depth. But
Yeah, great.
with all the listeners, I hope there's been plenty more that's shared where again you've taken some facets, some insights, and some inspiration out of that. I would just pass the floor to yourself, Dan, and say any closing remarks, any passes of wisdom on for success in general that you'd like to share with our viewers or listeners.
Oh, no, I don't think wisdom. I think, yes, believe in yourself, and just ask the question rather than tell it. I would just go that questions are the answer. And when someone says, I think, my favourite question at the moment, I just with my boys is trying to kind of practice with school, so the teachers are loving it. Is when they give them instruction, I just go back to say, when you say that, what exactly do you mean?
Yeah, and again, that
I
fuels
don't
the
know.
question, fuels further curiosity, and it
Exactly.
makes the teacher earn their crust. Yeah.
But it's been a really good chat, Joe. Really enjoyed it. Loving the podcast, and yeah, hopefully someone somewhere takes something from it. So yeah, it's been great to talk.
Thanks very much, mate.
Cheers.